Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Zach, and I'm the outreach coordinator here at Taxpayer Help Center. I'm excited to be here with you all to discuss a very important topic that affects all people who pay taxes, which is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The Taxpayer Help Center is a nonprofit 501c3 organization in Northridge, California, and we operate two tax clinics. One is our low-income taxpayer clinic, where we help taxpayers resolve their tax disputes with the Internal Revenue Service. And the other is our volunteer income tax assistance, which is also referred to commonly as VITA. And we help prepare income taxes for free. And so I'm the outreach coordinator, and then the clinic director is Masood Chotani. So today, during our presentation, we are going to look at each of the 10 fundamental rights that each taxpayer has. And then just before we get started, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat, and I'll be sure to address them. All right. And then if you would like to connect with us with have any questions or would like to schedule an appointment or anything, email info@taxpayershelpcenter.com. And then our Facebook is Taxpayers Help Center, Inc., a nonprofit organization. And then we're located at 9029 Reseda Boulevard. But you could always Google us, Taxpayers Help Center, and all this information will be available. So we help taxpayers both locally and beyond, and this is a nonprofit, and so the money that is made is through donations. So there's no money made, but the funding is all through donations. So if you could help us financially by donating funds or time, your expertise, it would be very much appreciated. All right, so without further ado, let's get started with our first topic, which is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Is the first presentation I've done here. So this is a cornerstone of the IRS's commitment to protect and promote your rights as a taxpayer. It comprises 10 fundamental rights, which we'll explore in more detail today. All right, so number one, the right to be informed. Taxpayers have the right to know what they need to do to comply with the tax laws. They are entitled to clear explanations of the laws and IRS procedures in all tax forms, instructions, publications, notices, and correspondence. They have the right to be informed of IRS decisions about their tax accounts and to receive clear explanations of the outcomes. This is in place so that the taxpayer knows what's going on and nothing's happening without them being aware of the reason. So what you can expect, number one, clear notices. Whenever you get a notice, it should clearly state any amount you owe for taxes, interest, and penalties, along with these reasons for these charges. They want you to know why everything is happening. Refund claims. If your refund claim is fully or partially denied, the IRS must explain why. And then also they offer online help. You can find help to understand any IRS notice or letter at irs.gov. Tax assessments. If the IRS plans to assess tax against you, their first letter will explain the whole process from the audit to collection, including your options for an independent appeal and help from the Taxpayer Advocate Service. Then also payment plans. If you have an installment agreement, the IRS will send you an annual statement to keep track of your balances and payments. So these services are free, and they're put in place to help you be informed, keep track of what's going on, and then state any explanations for anything the IRS does. Also, forms and publications. You can access current and past IRS forms and publications published online, or you could call them and they'll provide you with them. And then also social media. The IRS has social media accounts on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and they also have information on the IRS To Go mobile app. I personally follow them on Instagram. They post tips every once in a while, and it's important to stay updated. So I'd recommend you do the same on some media app. Number two, the right to quality service. Taxpayers have the right to receive prompt, courteous, and professional assistance in their dealings with the IRS, to be spoken to in a way they can easily understand, to receive clear and easily understandable communications from the IRS, and to speak to a supervisor about inadequate service. So what you can expect from this is finding answers. Most of your tax questions can be answered on irs.gov. If you can't find what you need, reach out to the IRS for help. They have representatives that are there to provide service for you if you don't, if you have any questions. Also, contact information. Every notice or letter that you get from the IRS should include a contact phone number in the top right corner. So, if you call them and you have a question, you can find answers. Objective listening. IRS representatives should listen to you objectively and consider all relevant information. And then they should be giving you prompt and accurate responses. Also, if you're speaking to someone and you're not satisfied with their assistance, you can always request to speak to a supervisor. And usually it solves the problem. And then also courtesy and collections. So when the IRS is collecting tax, they should treat you with courtesy. They generally contact you only between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. And they won't contact you at work if they know your employer doesn't allow it. Also, be aware of tax scams. The IRS is not going to be making phone calls to you about arrest, with threats about arrest or prison. So if you get a phone call and it says, hey, if you don't do this, you can get arrested or be sentenced to, time in prison. That's a scam. Don't fall for it. Also, taxpayer advocate service. The IRS includes information about your right to get help from the TAS in all statutory notices of deficiency. And they will tell you how to contact TAS. And also low-income taxpayer clinic, also referred to as LITC. So if you qualify for LITC assistance, which stands for low income taxpayer clinics, the IRS will provide you information about your legal options. Legal help options. So this, what we run, the low income taxpayers help center, provides LITC services. So you can come here if you qualify. You provide with free services to answer any questions you have. Also, another way to think about this, something that you may be more aware of because it's more well known, is when you go to court, you have the right to a lawyer. Same way when you have to deal with the IRS, you have the right to quality service for free. Number three, the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax. Taxpayers have the right to pay only the amount of tax legally due, including interest and penalties, and to have the IRS apply all tax payments properly. So what you can expect from this is filing for refunds. So if you think you've overpaid your taxes, you can file for a refund, but you have to make sure you do it within specific timeframes. So if this is something that you need to look into, publication 556 lays out all the details. Also, correcting errors on notices. If you get an IRS notice or a bill and think there's a mistake, write to the IRS office that sent it to you within the specified time frame. You have to include any records that can help correct the error. You can also call the number on the notice for help, and then also amending returns. If you find an error after you filed your return, you might need to amend it, especially if there are changes in your filing status, income, deductions, or credits. However, the IRS may automatically correct math errors or accept returns with certain forms missing, so you may not need to amend it in those cases. Requesting adjustments. If you owe more than the correct amount due under the law, or if the IRS assessed the legal amount, if the IRS assessed the amount after the legal period or made an error, you can request that the IRS remove it. And abatement of interest. If the IRS caused unreasonable errors or delays, you can ask them to remove any interest charged during that time. For example, if an IRS employee's prolonged absence caused a delay in issuing a statutory notice of deficiency and interest accrued during that period, you could request abatement of that interest. Offer and compromise. If you believe you don't owe all or part of your tax debt, you can submit an offer in compromise, asking the IRS to accept less than the full amount. And finally, payment plans. If you're on a payment plan, the IRS will send you an annual statement detailing your balances and payments. Basically, what this right is for is to make sure that everything is done correctly and that if there are any mistakes, that you have the right to, appeal and make sure it's done correctly. But the right to appeal is a whole different right. So we'll get to that one momentarily. And here it is. The right to challenge the IRS's position and be heard. Taxpayers have the right to raise objections and provide additional documentation in response to formal IRS actions or proposed actions. To expect that the IRS will consider their timely objections and documentation promptly and fairly, and to receive a response if the IRS does not agree with their position. So what you can expect from this, math or clerical errors. If the IRS notifies you of a math or clerical error on your tax return, you have 60 days to contest it. So you just have to provide photocopies of supporting records and call the number on your notice for assistance. And then if the IRS agrees with you, they'll adjust your account and send a corrected notice. And like we talked about in the first, I believe, first or second, right? When they send you a corrected notice, they explain the reason and everything's laid out very clearly, so you know what is going on. And then statutory notice of deficiency. If the IRS disagrees and proposes a tax adjustment, they'll send a statutory notice of deficiency. This notice allows you to challenge the adjustments in the United States Tax Court before payment. You must file a petition within 90 days or 150 days if you're outside the US. For details, you can visit the tax court's taxpayer information page online. And then return examination disputes. During a tax examination, if the IRS doesn't accept your documentation or objections, they'll issue a statutory notice of deficiency. This notice explains why your taxes are increased and allows you to petition the US tax court before paying. And levy notifications. If the IRS plans to levy your bank account or property, you can generally request a hearing with the Office of Appeals. You also have the opportunity to appeal the filing or proposed filing of a federal tax lien. So this kind of relates to the last slide about the right to pay no more than the correct amount of tax, in the sense that, if they mess up, you have the right to challenge them. Number 5, the right to appeal an IRS decision in an independent forum. Taxpayers are entitled to a fair and impartial administrative appeal of most IRS decisions, including many penalties, and have the right to receive a written response regarding the Office of Appeals decision. Taxpayers generally have the right to take their cases to court. So what you can expect from this: independent IRS Office of Appeals. The IRS commissioner ensures there's an independent Office of Appeals separate from the office that initially reviews your case. Appeals won't discuss your case with the IRS in ways that compromise their independence. And then publication 5, your appeal rights. This publication guides you on how to appeal if you disagree with the IRS's findings. So the IRS actually has a publication that explains to you how to appeal to the IRS. And then statutory notice of deficiency. So if you receive a notice proposing additional tax, filing a timely petition with the United States Tax Court allows you to dispute the adjustment before paying. So this was also in the last mentioned in the last right. And then also refund suit. If you've fully paid tax and the IRS denies your refund claim or takes no action within 6 months, you may file a refund suit in a United States District Court or the United States Court of Federal Claims. You generally have 2 years from the date of the IRS's denial notice to file this suit. Number 6, the right to finality. Taxpayers have the right to know the maximum amount of time they have to challenge the IRS's position, as well as the maximum amount of time the IRS has to audit a particular taxpayer, or excuse me, a particular tax year or collect a tax debt. Taxpayers have the right to know when the IRS has finished an audit. So what you can expect from this, an assessment time frame. The IRS typically has 3 years from your tax return filing date to assess additional tax for that year, with exceptions for cases like failure to file or fraudulent cases. Collection period. After assessment, the IRS generally has 10 years to collect unpaid taxes from you unless extended by agreement or court judgment. Suspension of this period may occur during bankruptcy or certain IRS proceedings. Filing for refunds. If you believe you overpaid taxes, you can file a refund claim within 3 years from your original filing date or 2 years from the date you paid the tax, whichever one is later. Statutory notice of deficiency. So like the last two, if the IRS proposes additional tax in a statutory notice of deficiency, it includes a deadline for you to file a petition with the tax or to dispute the amount. Tax court petition to challenge a statutory notice of deficiency file, or excuse me, to challenge a statutory notice of deficiency, file your petition within 90 days or 150 days if you're outside the US. And then audit limitations. Generally, the IRS audits your tax return once per tax year, though they may reopen it if necessary, such as for suspected fraud. So the right to finality basically is there in place to make sure you are aware how much time you have. And it allows taxpayers the right to know when the IRS has finished an audit. Number 7, the right to privacy. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any IRS inquiry, examination, or enforcement action will comply with the law and be no more intrusive than necessary, and will respect all due process rights, including search and seizure protections, and will provide, where applicable, a collection due process hearing. So what you can expect: wage levy limits. The IRS can only levy a portion of your wages to collect taxes owed, protecting an amount equivalent to the standard deduction plus any personal exemptions. Protection of personal items. Certain personal items like essential school books, clothing, undelivered mail, and limited furniture and household items are exempt from IRS seizure. Your primary home cannot be seized without court approval, and IRS must demonstrate that other collection methods are impractical. This is basically saying, the IRS does not have the right without the court's approval to take control of certain things. If they're saying, "Oh, I'm going to take your clothes, school books, furniture," those are things that you need, and therefore they cannot take those without approval. Offers and compromise for liability. If you submit an offer to settle your tax debate based solely on the amount owed, a doubt as to liability offer and compromise, you do not need to provide financial documentation. Audit process. During an audit, the IRS should not request intrusive information about your lifestyle unless there is reasonable suspicion of reported income. And then again, like the last one says, if you believe for whatever reason they are doing it for an unreasonable suspicion of unreported income, you could always challenge them, whether or not you are determined that what you challenge is deemed valid, will be up to the court, but you can always challenge the court. And then collection due process hearings. In a collection due process hearing, the Office of Appeals evaluates whether the IRS collection actions balance efficiency tax collection with minimal intrusion into your affairs. All right, number 8, the right to confidentiality. Taxpayers have the right to expect that any information they provide with the IRS will not be disclosed unless authorized by the taxpayer or by law. Taxpayers have the right to expect appropriate actions, or excuse me, to the right to expect that appropriate action will be taken against employees, return preparers, and others who wrongfully use or disclose taxpayer return information. Confidentiality of tax information. So generally, the IRS cannot disclose your tax information to third parties without your explicit permission, such as when you request disclosure for a mortgage or student loan application. And limits on IRS contact. Typically, the IRS cannot contact third parties like your employer, neighbor, or bank to gather information for adjusting or collecting your taxes without providing you reasonable notice in advance. Confidential communications, similar to the confidentiality protection afforded to attorneys. Communications with individuals authorized to practice before the IRS, such as certified public accountants or CPAs or enrolled agents, are confidential if they advise you on tax matters, excluding tax return preparation within their IRS practice, would be confidential between an attorney and you, relate to non-criminal tax matters before the IRS, or relate to non-criminal tax proceedings in federal court involving the United States. Penalties for improper disclosure. Tax preparers who knowingly or recklessly disclose or misuse your tax information for purposes other than tax preparation may be subject to criminal fines and imprisonment. So if the person preparing your taxes messes up, that's one issue. But if the person doing your taxes knowingly enters incorrect information, then there will, they could be subject to criminal investigation. Number 9, the right to retain representation. Taxpayers have the right to retain an authorized representative of their choice to represent them in their dealings with the IRS. Taxpayers have the right to seek assistance from a low-income tax clinic, taxpayer clinic, if they cannot afford representation. So what you can expect is choice of representation. You can designate an attorney, certified public accountant, or CPA, or enrolled agent to represent you in IRS interviews. You are not required to attend alongside your representative unless formally summoned by the IRS. Right to suspend interviews. In most cases, the IRS must hold an interview if you request to consult with an IRS with a representative such as an attorney, CPA, or enrolled agent. So if you are talking in an interview and you don't know how to answer a question, you could halt the interview and then consult with whoever is representing you. Number 10, the right to a fair and just tax system. Taxpayers have the right to expect the tax system to consider facts and circumstances that may affect their underlying liabilities, ability to pay, or ability to provide information timely. Taxpayers have the right to receive assistance from the Taxpayer Advocate Service if they are experiencing financial difficulty or if the IRS has not resolved their tax issues properly and timely through its normal channels. So what you can expect: payment plans. If you're unable to pay your full tax debt, you can arrange a payment plan with the IRS. This involves making regular monthly payments over time, and you can apply to this using the IRS online payment agreement application. So you can find this on the IRS website. Offer and compromise. You can submit an offer to compromise with the IRS requesting to settle your tax debt for less than the full amount. This option applies if you believe you don't owe all or part of the debt, can't pay it within the time allowed, or if paying it would cause financial hardship. So basically, the IRS tries to work with you, depending on your circumstances. IRS guidelines on living costs. The IRS provides national and local guidelines on basic living expenses, which could be used when considering an offer to reduce your tax debt. These guidelines ensure that your basic living expenses are covered, and the IRS considers actual expenses if these guidelines don't meet your needs. Wage levy exemption. The IRS cannot seize all of your wages to collect unpaid taxes. A portion is protected to cover essential living expenses. So they can't take all your money if, you have barely enough money to live and they're still trying to collect it. That's when you have to work with them. And they hopefully we'll work with you. Taxpayer assistance. You can seek assistance from the Taxpayer Advocate Service or a low-income taxpayer clinic if you need help with navigating tax issues. Interest abatement. The IRS has the authority to reduce or eliminate the unpaid portion of any tax liability. It can also abate excessive or improperly assessed interest or interest resulting from IRS errors or delays. Abatement for IRS errors. Interest on underpayments caused by unreasonable IRS delays or errors can be abated if the taxpayer or their representative did not contribute to their delay or effort. All right, and that's all of those are the 10 fundamental rights for every taxpayer. So thank you. Again, since this is a nonprofit and the services that are offered are free, any donations help, whether it's monetary donations or if you are able to volunteer your time or expertise, anything is greatly appreciated. And then also, if you'd like to contact, the information is over here on this slide, but also on Google, if you type in Taxpayers Help Center, it'll show, the address, email, phone number. So feel free to reach out. And thank you very much for listening.